Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. My guest this week is Rory Underwood, best known as a rugby player from the amateur era of rugby union, and he's the record try scorer for England, still holds that record. Amazing after all these years that he is the man with the score on the board, as it were. He was an RAF pilot, a very successful RAF pilot, and we talk a lot about the challenges of balancing that RAF career, which was, after all, that was what was paying the bills in those days, with also playing rugby at international level, because that was not an easy balance to strike. He's nowadays the founder and chief executive of Wingman, his own company that specializes in leadership development and team development for corporates, bringing all that knowledge he took from both the rugby pitch and also the RAF into what he now does day to day, in a very similar field to me. So lots of really fascinating insights, great discussion we had on a whole range of issues that I hope you find enjoyable. I really enjoyed the conversation with him. I hope you like it too. And without any further blather from me, let's go. Rory, thanks so much indeed for joining me this morning on the podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have a chance to chat to you. You've had a fascinating career. Really look forward to the discussion.
Thanks for inviting me, Bob. I've seen your podcast going around for a while. Been very successful. So thank you much for inviting me.
Not at all. No. It's always great. And especially because we're doing similar but slightly different things. And I think that makes for a really interesting discussion along the way. Yep. But I mean, to kick it off, I always tend to start with people's backgrounds. I mean, you've had an incredible, and really multifaceted career. England rugby player, RAF pilot, now obviously founder and CEO of Wingman with everything you're doing. Just to get us started, can we're going to dive into the leadership stuff and what you're doing now in more detail. But if you could just give me a bit of a flavor of your story, as it were, to date.
How long have you got? Well, I mean, yes.
Long enough.
Basically, each of us who went aircrew have always got a different story as to how we got into flying. Either it's family, or you've got a passion for it, or some of the people I know that were going through the same time as I did, they did it as a bet, or somebody else. I remember one guy, somebody went in, I can't believe that guy got in. So he went, I'll go and do it. So he did it, and he joined in. He went through tornadoes. I think you probably know. But for me, I was born in Middlesbrough. My grandparents, my father were all from Middlesbrough, that part of the northeast of England. And obviously, my mum's from Malaysia. And my dad met my mum out in Malaysia. So when I grew up, my first 11, 12 years, I was living in Malaysia. Started boarding school at 8 over in the UK. So that's where I went to Barney Castle School. And so 3 times a year, myself and my brother Gary, we're the 2 older ones, Tony's 6 years younger than me, we used to fly back to Malaysia for holidays, for school holidays. And in the early days, I remember flying bike outs out of Teesside Airport down to Terminal 1, and then being carted from Terminal 1 to Terminal 3 to go and fly BOACs in those days, probably, over to KL. And I mean, I could talk forever about that sort of YP experience, being stuck at the back of a 707. And in those days, we'd always been the last row or 2 rows with a stewardess being looking after us. And of course, the back end of the aircraft is smoking, wasn't it? In the old days.
It's hard to believe that, isn't it? That we used to allow smoking on airplanes.
I know. So anyway, that was what. And so I used to look out the window, and of course, those windows in those days were quite small. So you look out the window and see the terminal flying past, or whichever place we landed. Because in the early days, it was like, now it's a non-stop trip to KL, but in those days, it was invariably, sometimes it was 3 or 4 trips, and then it got to, the one in the Middle East, and we over Muscat, Bahrain, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, whatever. And it sort of cut the journey down so much with just one stop. But either way, I always wanted to know what it looked like out the front. And that's what got my fascination. As a young kid, I used to send a write off to the marketing departments, all the airlines, asking them for information. They'd send me all their bum as a crackpot kid who's interested in flying. That's why I started my flying. And so, that's where I got the sort of bug, but just the thought of that's wanting to be a pilot. And what started out being a commercial pilot, because that's all I knew. The real challenge I had was either you needed a degree or you needed to go and join the BA course, and it was 60 grand or whatever it was to go and join. So when I went to school at the age of 13, I joined the CCF at school and the RAF section. And it was through that and the Air Force, we all know the cadet system is very good at recruiting. It's wonderful because it's like test and try. We've all been on the space cadet camps and all that sort of stuff in the summer, and you go around all the places, and it did. There were two videos. One was a JAG one, where I remember the guy saying, flying down the valley in Wales somewhere, you can't do a loop the loop in a jumbo jet. Probably Cadwell, the Smiths tried it. And then I think I remember it's an F4 poster with somebody saying it was peeing down rain, it was blowing a gale, and I stood on top of the steps up to the F4, and they were saying, Met says it's clear above 54,000 feet. So it was that sort of thing that really inspired me. So that's what got me into flying. Literally, that was it. And so I started flying and all that sort of stuff. And my desire was to join the Air Force. And of course, of our age, we know that at that time, rugby was an amateur game. So whilst I was playing rugby at school, it was just a hobby that I was playing. I started doing a few representative schoolboy things at upper six at school, but it really wasn't until the year after I left school that things all started kicking off, and I started playing for the Durham County senior team. I got picked to play for England Colts, but at the end of that first year, I got picked to play for the England under-23s tour to Italy in the summer. And at this stage, I was trying to get in the Air Force. So my first time doing the full thing, I failed an AT and asked me to come back a year later, probably young and naive, which doesn't surprise me, and immature. And I went back a year later and got picked up. And so that's where I joined the Royal Air Force. Did the Air Force know that I was coming in? Yes. I actually got a phone call. I can't remember that guy's name. I got a phone call at home, mum's house. And the guy said, Rory, just wanted to say congratulations. You've been accepted into IoT training. They're right. Said, obviously, we're conscious about, your rugby and stuff. So when would you like to start? Which IoT would you like to start? So I had an option, and it was basically I was playing in the, with Yorkshire was getting to the finals of the county championship, which was on the last weekend of January. And the first entrance after that was the 13th, 14th of February. So I was put on 68 IoT course in February 1983. And so, yes, the Air Force are very aware because on the Monday, if you remember back to those dim and distant past, we used to walk around walk around with kit and all kit being stacked up and all that stuff, the old DPMs and stuff. And I got Underwood, you got to go report to Wing Commander Diot. Oh, right, okay. Didn't know what that meant. So I went and saw the wing commander in charge of officer training. You're right, Underwood, tomorrow at 4:00, you must be ready with your rugby training kit, and a flight attendant Lacey will be waiting to pick you up. Oh, okay. Literally, I was picked up by this flight attendant Lacey. He picked me up, drove me to Bottisford from Cranwell to Bottisford on the A52, and I got dumped at Nigel Gillingham's house, who was the captain of the Royal Air Force team. I stayed a night in his house. And then 6:00 next morning, we got a train all the way down to Plymouth. And the Air Force played Plymouth Albion that night, the Wednesday night. So I got trained down, met the Air Force guys, did a training session in the afternoon, played that night, stayed in the wardroom. There's an experience, because obviously I was an officer cadet, so technically I stayed in the wardroom down at H. Drake, I think it was. And the next day, got a train back. And at 4:00, I got dropped off at my billet at Cranwell to find my flight being taught how to do ironing. You remember the ironing with the brown paper? So my first week, I had 2 days where I was away out of the officer training. So that was the way it was going to carry on going. So I mean, that's the early stages. I mean, we can talk about the other stuff with the business afterwards, but that's how it got on. And I went through the training system. I mean, it's well documented. I failed tornadoes in '86. We can talk about it in more detail if you want to. It was fascinating the conversion from Hawks to tornadoes, which I struggled with primarily because of Alpha, and nearly went Pat Alberts, but subsequently the Air Force actually thought we got a chance here, so they sent me to the Canberras, which is an ideal place for me to play rugby, obviously from 360 Squadron. Spent 6.5 years on the Canberras, really enjoyed it, and then I was looking to do a fast jet crossover, so they put me on 100 Squadron for 6 months. But 100 Squadron had just converted from the Tatty Turn had just converted from Canberras into Hawks. So I joined the Hawks at a very early stage, and I did 6 months, and I was like, I'm enjoying this. As you know, the Hawks, fantastic aircraft.
Yeah, brilliant.
I really enjoyed it, and I remember thinking, why not just here? This is a great aircraft, great squadron. Why not stay here? So long story short, I asked the boss if I could stay. He said, yes, fine. The poster wasn't very happy because he'd been, obviously sorting everything out to get my fast jet crossover. So I ended up flying on 100 Squadron for 4.5 years, and it's probably the best 4.5 years of flying I've had, whizzing around on a Hawk at low level. Did a 3-year ground tour doing crew resource management and station flight safe dress at Cranwell, and then finished off my last 3 years flying the Domini at 55 Squadron. Predominantly helped me get my ATPL sorted out, which in the end I didn't need, but I did about 700 hours on the Domini, which was fascinating as well. There's a lot of good things learned from that as well through my flying career. So, and the rugby, basically, again, very well documented. First cap the year after I joined the Air Force. I joined in February 83, February 84. I got my first cap for England, and I retired from England in 96, finished playing rugby in 99, and then left the Air Force in 2001.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I think it's fascinating that you kept that kind of double life, as it were, all the way through. Because I mean, having been in the Air Force the whole time, I mean, I remember I was in Germany when you started playing for England, and obviously we were all thinking, "Wow, this is amazing! We've got this Air Force guy who's playing at that level." We were obviously watching on the telly, and it was terrific. But I can well imagine the kind of the tension between doing the flying job and regardless of where you're doing it and what type of airplane, and doing the rugby commitments that are there. And as you say, obviously it was an amateur game then versus professional now. I did an interview actually not that long ago with Ralph and Henry Arundel.
All right, yeah.
Ralph worked for me in one of my later jobs in the Air Force, and obviously Henry's his son.
Right. Yeah,
and so that was a really interesting conversation, because clearly Henry's in a different era in the rugby game with with it now being professional, and he's and all the bits that go with that. But I mean, we'll come back to the Air Force thing, because there's definitely some stuff in there that'd be worth picking up on. But on the rugby bit, because most people don't ever get that, you might play it at school or play a sport at school. And how did the whole thing go in terms of getting spotted as a top level player, and kind of what's it like? You're playing for your country. That's got to be an amazing thing, right?
yeah. I mean, it's like anything with sort of sport. The school system plays a big part. You play in school games, and I was playing for Barney, so I've got the tour. So I used to play against Durham, RGS Newcastle, Dame Allens, Pocklington, St Peters York, Sedbergh, obviously Will Carling and Will Greenwood's alma mater, St Bees over on the Cumbrian coast. That was our sort of Durham, Northumberland, and Cumbria was our sort of our patch. And you get picked up, and I think I was, I got picked up at the end of my low six to be on the bench for the Durham schoolboys under 18s. But then in my final year, myself and Rob Andrew, because we're at school together, we got picked up to play in the Durham under 18 schoolboys team. And of course, once you get picked up, then you're sort of known. So I got picked up in that, and I knew that there was a Colts structure, so the Colts were under 19s. So when I finished my year at school, I got as far as the North of England trial, and I didn't get any further than that. A couple of the guys, I think Barry Evans was my same year, he played for England, but some of the North guys, they went on to play for England at schoolboys. I didn't think much of it. It's just, just even getting recognised and going to play in the North of England trial at the Vale of Loon was a real, accolade for a little old Barney school sort of thing. And the following year, a variety of things of having to do some retakes of A levels and various other bits and pieces to get the necessary quals to get in the Air Force, and doing the recruitment down at Biggin Hill. I can remember going back to school, and from a rugby perspective, I was just going to join the Air Force. I was just waiting for time to go and redo the selection, go down for 5 days as it was in those days. And then rugby-wise, obviously, while I was waiting to go and do that, I very consciously, I knew that there was England Colts, so I was trying to get into the Durham Colt side and sort of work my way through that. Colts normally played sort of the springtime, Easter time was when they played those. And then I remember somebody saying to me, "Oh, so you've been picked for Durham?" And I was like, "What? It's not till the spring." And this was like September. I was in the paper. So I went to look at the Northern Echo. The school we had was a rotunda in the old school at Barney. And it had the papers out there on the broadsheets. And I had a look in the Northern Echo, and it was the probables and the possibles in a trial for Durham, the senior Durham county side. So I literally, I'm a young baby, school year. I'm a June baby. So I literally just turned 18 in June, and this was obviously 4 months later. And I saw my name in the possibles. Yeah. And it was in those days, because obviously you don't, the modern technology. So it was in the paper, and I think a letter came through a couple of days later saying you've been invited to whatever. So I went to Durham City Rugby Ground, which is where the trial was at. So I played for the possibles, and I scored 4 tries that night.
So it pretty
And
rapidly became a probable then.
yeah, so afterwards they were naming the side to play against the south of Scotland in a warm-up game before they played in the county championship. And the way the county championship was in those days, they had the division, so the North played themselves in the county championship, and who came top played each other off to be the go and play the for the finals. So we were, I mean, it was very strong. It was like Durham, Yorkshire, Northumberland, Cumbria, Cheshire. There's six of them. I'm sure I missed one out. Anyway, the Lancashire obviously very strong from that perspective, and Northumberland as well. Gosforth was a very strong powerhouse in those days. So, so I got picked up to play for Durham. Suddenly, I was playing for the senior side. Never mind playing for Durham Colts. I played for Durham and played in the things. We didn't obviously we either near the bottom, something like that. Didn't think anything of it, and then I got picked to play for Durham Colts. And this time I managed to get my way through. So I played for Durham Colts, went through the England trial, possibles and probables, coming where that was now, somewhere in the Midlands. And I got picked and I played for England Colts that year. And I can remember the first game I played against the French youth, they call those French youth, down at Portsmouth. And in the change room, somebody gave me a letter. So this was like, it'll be April time, 1982. Somebody gave me a letter, an open letter, and it was a invitation to go and tour Italy with the England under-23s touring team. It was like, I was hoping to play, Durham Colts and hopefully make England Colts. And here's me being asked to go and play for the England 23s. So suddenly I went down. This is the way an amateur game is, Bob. So we toured Italy in May. So we went to Italy, and all their rugby's in the north, obviously. And we played Italy under 23s on the Tuesday. So we got there in the weekend. On the Tuesday night, we played Italy under 23s. We then played Italy B on the Thursday night. And then we played against Italy the full national side on the Saturday afternoon. And there was about
lots of recovery time.
Yeah, no, there's about 7 of us who played in all 3 games. I mean, that tour, Mike Teague, Brian Moore, Gary Rees, Stuart Barnes, Simon Halliday, myself. That's sort of the ilk on that we always talk about it because that generation came through for the the success in the 90s with the England team. That's the reason why eventually the Air Force obviously they recognised that I was coming through and I was a reasonably a good player when they found out I was going to join the Air Force. And then joined the Air Force in '83 and literally February '84. I've been called in the England squad, just in the squad on the Christmas before. I didn't play in the first game against Scotland in that '84 season. Mike Slemon did, and then I got picked for the next game against Ireland in '84. So I was literally doing my flying training, and eventually the Air Force said to me, it was like end of June, January, something like that. They said, right, we're a bit concerned about all the flying, all the rugby you're doing, Rory. So going to take you off flying. And of course, for me, that was my job. I was wanting to become a pilot.
That's such a typical. I love the military approach to this because they go, right, we've got this guy he's face of the Air Force now, playing rugby out there. So you might be a pilot, but we'll take you off flying training. I've never had the chance to speak to any of the the guys that were around at the time. Bless him, Mike Steer and Mike now are no longer with us, but they were both on the RFU. Mitty, you must know Mike Steer, and everybody knows Mike Knight. So I never actually spoken about some of the stuff in the early life. But when I look back and reflect on it, I sort of think they were given the nod because obviously the 2 guys were on the board and they're saying, look, Rory's going to play. The playing international rugby during that period, while I was still going through flying training, as you know, when you're going through that, I mean, literally, I'd just gone solo in the JP. So we're doing the sort of circuit consolidation and then whatever stuff we did after that, working towards 5G, was it, whatever it is. So, it's a fairly formative sort of part of the training. Yeah, very much so.
They're a bit concerned about all the stuff I was doing because I would be away for 2-3 days with England and various things. And so I look back and think they must have been given the nod and sort of decided to move me, being proactive about just go and concentrate on your flying. They sent me to Swindon, so just up the road here. I became a flight commander at on the airman recruit thing there. So yeah. I was a token flight commander. I didn't do any teaching or anything like that. I just had an office and I sat in there just ringing my mates on the GPTN network, just bored. But then I played lots of rugby. But literally within the week or 2 of that, then I get the phone call saying you've been picked to play for England. And then all hell broke loose because obviously I got found out on the Sunday night. They told me that Derek Morgan, the chairman, was running on Sunday night. And I said, fine, okay. It was not being released to the press until Monday morning. So you can't tell anybody about it. So I said, fine. There was a passing out parade happening shortly. So I was one of the flight commanders. the early stages of, you just pass that IOT, your marching is actually reasonably good because it's just finished
Yeah.
IOT. So I was doing the sort of marching in front of the one of the flight commanders with the recruits. They're practicing for their passing out parade, and I was in that one of the hangars at Swindeby doing the pressing. And then, of course, about 11 o'clock, this corporal just sort of telephone call from you. It's the London Press Agency. So I went, oh crikey, it's true then. It was a bit of a. I woke up Monday morning thinking, did I dream that? Did I dream that I was being selected? Anyway, so and then all hell broke loose because every Tom, Dick, and Harry wanted to have a chat with this new 20-year-old that's been picked to play for England. He's a pilot. His name's Rory. He plays on the wing. So I mean, you can imagine all the editors just licking the lips at all the puns and various headlines they could work with that. So they wanted to send us. Of course, the problem was I was at Swindeby. Of course, at the time, the only aircraft they had there was the Chipmunk.
Yeah.
So they had all this lot descending on Swindeby on Tuesday. And that Tuesday, the weather was cack, really. It was like typical, grey, low cloud, that sort of stuff. They couldn't even fly a jet Provost to have as a backdrop. So in the end, they did all, if you ever look at, if you just trawl through the papers and look at some of the images that came out on the Wednesday morning, there's a picture of me stood on top of a chipmunk. This is my early sort of experience of the press because they had me put on, I said, one hand had a rugby ball under one arm and a helmet, because the helmets are sort of fairly boxed down, helmet on that arm. And I'm stood on this, the wing of the chipmunk. And I'm sort of doing some pose that they've asked me to do. Underneath it goes, like wing commander. So, if the puns were starting early, so wing commander. And I'm trying to look steely-eyed jet jock standing on a chipmunk. Little did people know, so it was ever so funny. That set the scene for the rest of that. And what interesting, just to finish off with that story, I did the rest of the 6. I played 3 games. It was about 4 weeks. I must have been off flying for about 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks possibly. But because the weather had been so bad that spring, I actually went back and I was not far behind. But as you know, all of us pilots do know, because they sort of said, you're not that far behind and we'll leave you on the course. Because I was fearful of being recoursed onto another course because you develop those sort of bonds with the people you're flying with. And so I managed to stay with the guys on 45 course. And because they had to catch me up, actually what happened was that I ended up getting a lot of consistency in flights. Because it's like when you sort of fly once every other day, you just forget after stuff.
Yeah, continuity really matters.
So if you play once or twice a day, every day of the week, then continuity makes a massive difference to your ability. And people don't realize, I talk to people about it, the whole context of that sausage machine that we are. I mean, the training system is so different now to what it was when we went through. But whatever it is, 160 hours, 70 hours, where it is when you go through basic, you are literally expected to have got the last sortie sorted out and you're moving on to the next one. And you've got to take on this new skill, this new understanding, all the terminology, all the dynamics of whatever the flight is, and you've got to move on. And if you just sort of drop behind the drag curve, it doesn't take much before you're literally just cast off, because it was a real sausage factory in those days. And so that's the constant pressure. And I know we've talked about the sort of things we're going to talk about today. And that was sometimes at the time, I mean, I was 21 at the time. I'm flying jets and I'm whizzing around, driving around, playing rugby. I mean, I was having the whale of my life. But it was, you're driving everywhere. People don't realize how physically and mentally demanding it is flying, especially for us as baby budgies. We're constantly having to think about the information is being crammed into us, and we're trying to simulate that and then use it in the flying experience. But what was also interesting was the fact that I had the 2 things actually helped in the other way, because you can go run around a rugby pitch and it just sort of release the pressure. You go and escape on the rugby pitch and run around and just feel the wind in your hair and that sort of stuff. And then you come back, I played middle of the week, I've gone and played at Coltishall, and, from Cranwell, you think Coltishall is actually quite close. Relatively it is. But it's 50 miles away. It takes like 2 hours.
Certainly in those days.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, was it Coltishall? I think, or was it, we played North Washington? I don't know. But when I got back at some stupid o'clock, and of course I was expected a Met brief the next day, to go flying. So, I look back in those sort of things, you go, how the hell did you sort of do it? But you do. Did
you ever worry about the injury risk? I mean, obviously in those days particularly, I think that we were really sensitive about flying in terms of medical state and things. Was that a factor?
To be honest, no. I didn't. Whether I was naive or I just didn't think about it. I mean, the biggest thing that I ever had was, obviously for most of us, is just colds. The old bunged up eustachian tubes. But from a injury point of view, and I was very lucky. I had minimal injuries, bangs and bruises and that sort of stuff. Very few strains. I was very lucky. I never broke any bones. I mean, I've only ever missed one England game in all my career because of injury, and that was for a slight hamstring strain.
Mm-hmm. It is fortunate, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yeah,
interesting. I was going to ask you in a second about your views about professional game now. I mean, because that certainly seems to be one of the things that, in my perspective, from a completely viewer-only point of view, that has changed. That it's a much, much more, in many ways. I mean, it's obviously a very physical game when you played it, but they're just much bigger. They're training, obviously, and bulking
yeah.
up all the time, and it just seems like, I mean, the impacts on the pitch. You go to a match, you're sitting in the crowd, you can hear it. You go, oh
My,
god.
my my view is it's not quite as concerning and or dramatic about the way the game has gone. I can vividly remember our time in the 90s when England had a really good period. We won the three Grand Slams, and even some of the old Alakadoos in the RFU committee, some of the old farts, were sort of commenting about they felt that we were actually becoming a little bit too professional, and we weren't even being paid then. It was more of an attitude thing, but it was becoming professional then. If you look at that period of that 90s and you go back to the 80s when I first started playing, to the team in the 70s, you know, skill was still there, but fitness and ability and knowledge of the game, it moves at a pace. And so, you look at the game now. Yes, the game has moved on, 100%. These guys are athletes. We were, but we were not honed athletes. These guys and girls are honed athletes, and it makes a massive difference. But you go and speak to a young lad, say a young 20-year-old that's starting out on the rugby career, and talking about the physicality compared to our time. They doesn't make a difference to them. They just see what they're doing now. They don't know anything different.
Sure.
And so, again, people talk about, oh, they're so big. Well, it's interesting. Jonah Lomu was my generation in the 90s. Jonah Lomu was 6'5", played on the wing. I played against much bigger people than Jonah. I played against much quicker people than Jonah. I played against 22, 23 stone Tongan props. You won't want to be sat on by them. But there were always big people in those days. But there are no fatties around anymore. That's the difference. Our generation, when we went through the 90s, you still had some fatties, which you could just, I could literally just run around them because they were so slow. But all the forwards now, they've become athletes. So they've got some pace, they've got some ability, they've got agility, etc. Which, when we were around, we could run around the forwards if they were down the blind side. That's not the case nowadays because everybody's so much fitter and the expectation all around the game that they need. And you look at the success of it. Yes, there's some big players, but at the moment, if you look at the number one team in the world champions last 2 years is South Africa. They're two wingers. They're not monsters.
Mm.
And then you look at who are the two leading try scorers in Europe. I'm number two, and Shane Williams is number one. Now I'm 5'9". Shane's very similar. We're not the biggest guys, and yet I've got 49. He's got 50 odd tries. That's one of those things, and if you want to talk about the sort of the concerns about the concussion and various things, we can do. But it's one of those things. The game. So going back to the original question you asked me about that sort of stuff. Really, to be honest with you, the bits that really caused me the problems was not so much that physical sort of type thing. Was when you started playing in September or sort of April, when the weather was starting to get drier, and the pitches were summer with September, so the pitches all rock hard and dry, and in April when the weather starts turning and the pitches to go rock hard again, was getting grazes on the side of your hips when you're diving around and that sort of stuff. And of course, especially the time during the 90s when I was wearing G suits, last thing you need is
That hurts. Yeah.
the G comes on and you get this, oh, yes, that's right on my, the bit on my, the side of the hip and stuff like that. And of course, then your long johns stick to your sores on the thing. And that's all the sort of, you don't know anything about that. So, but no, it was, I wasn't really that consciously worried about it at all. No, I lived very much enjoying looking for the next game, the next trip, that sort of thing.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, you mentioned it, so let's have a quick chat. The concussion thing. I mean, where do you think that is heading? Pardon the pun. In terms of risks.
So look, it's like anything else. What really irritates me about some of I won't get to mention the politics, about the way people are trying to sort things out, and I use a lot of this sort of thinking when I talk about businesses. When people say we want to make the game safe, you can't say that. The only way you're going to make the game safe is if you don't play. It's a physical contact sport. It doesn't make a difference whether you get head knocks or whatever. The way the game is, your brain will be rattling around your head when you're doing all the collisions and you never have head contact. The end game is that we want to make the game as safe as possible without reducing the game that we love, etc. And make sure that we are knowledgeable enough about what's going on and being able to help people with return to play protocols, etc. like that. Because we all love the game. We all, I went in, you say, I didn't worry about it because I recognized that was a challenge. I go and play rugby. I could have broken my leg. I could have broken an arm, whatever. And that would have curtailed my flying career big time. But I didn't think about that. I knew there was a risk, but I just accepted it and I went with it. And that's part of what a lot of us do when we go into rugby. We do that. And so when I hear people talking about we've got to make the game safe, it's impossible to make the game safe. That's a misnomer from my perspective. And like anything else, we are every year goes by, we're learning more about the impact of all the collisions with regards to what's happening to the brain. But there's still a hell of a lot we don't understand and we don't know. There is so much. And you think about what's being done now with the head injury assessments and all different things. It leaps away from where it was when I was playing, where it was how many fingers? Two. That's close enough. Off we go.
Get back on, yeah.
That sort of stuff. And so it is a real challenge. But from my perspective, we all go into the game knowing that's the case. And one of the things that's always frustrated me about the rules, when I played rugby, if there was a rule change in the game, it was like, oh my God, that's a novelty. The whole of my playing career, I don't think there was possibly one, possibly two changes in the laws of the game.
Yeah, now it's constant, isn't it?
At the moment, they're trying to put in 3 or 4 every other year. They just keep tinkering with it, which really irritates the hell out of me. And there is a bit of me that, sometimes some of the decisions they've been making, and I get trying to change some of the behaviours, but it's tail wagging dog. There's a bit of right reasons, but going about it the wrong way has been my sort of mantra. But something that we're doing now around how we protect our players and how we get them back to play, we could go just 10 years down the line and we said, this is what we did back 10 years ago. And they'd be going, you did what? You're thinking, they think we'd be more barking mad. But at the moment, we are trying to do what we think is right from the knowledge we have now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
We can't try and protect in the forward. You've only got the information you have now, and you're trying to do your best by what we're doing now. And as I say to you, every year we go past, they're learning more and more and more about the impact of it all. So anyway, those are my general views about it all.
Yeah, just before we move off rugby, I mean, you mentioned it a minute ago in terms of high try scorers. I mean, you're still England's record-holding try scorer, which must be an amazing thing. I mean, it's nearly 30 years ago now, obviously, that you stopped playing, certainly for England, and not far off that completely.
That is very frightening, but thank you very much. It's 30 years. So next year, next April, so in sort of like 16 months' time, would have been 30 years from my last game for England in March 96.
Yeah. Time marches on, doesn't it? But that's incredible that you've held that record all that time, and it must be a great feeling to still be in that place.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, I don't sit back and laud and whatever. People always make the comment whenever I go anywhere, but it's a cracking record to have. It really is. And when Johnny May was playing until he sort of stopped playing for England until recently, every time he scored a try, my name was mentioned in the dispatches because every time it is. And they got one closer to the record of Rory Underwood. So my name was talked about all the time. Sort of, one of those things you never get out of the news with the rugby. So it's a difficult one. I said to people, you've got to have two things. You have a proclivity of scoring tries. You've got to be somebody who scores lots of tries, which sounds bleeding obvious. But you need to combine that with longevity.
Mm-hmm.
I was very lucky. I had a 12-year career for England. A long career. There's not many people that do 12 years. They play more games now in a year than we did when I played. But as we discussed, the physical battles and stuff, you wouldn't find England under 23s playing 3 games in 5 days nowadays.
Yeah. Well, it's very noticeable in the Rugby World Cups on, for example, isn't it? The space, the length of time it takes to play the overall tournament.
Very clear guidelines. It's it's so many minutes of game time in any 7-day period. So trying to restrict it, and of course they're trying to do it with the training as well. So, it's there to be beaten. So we shall see.
Yeah, nice. Hey, the last one on rugby, just because I can't resist this, but playing with your brother, I mean, that's got to be great, isn't it? Tony obviously played a number of games alongside you, and that must be an amazing experience.
It is. I think we played 19 games and all that together. We obviously played in the 95 World Cup. So it was great. We both went on the Lions tour in 93. And of course, we've got the 2 Curry brothers playing on the flanks for England against Ireland. So, there's been plenty of brothers that have have gone. But I found out a little stat the other day. Somebody told me that a couple of weeks ago that myself and Tony are only one of two pairs of brothers that have both scored a try in a game for England.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's a good stat.
Tony and I scored a try in a game together. I don't know how many times. I remember the Scotland game. I don't know if we scored more than that. But there's another couple of brothers from a long time ago, earlier last century, who both scored in the same game as well. It's only one of two brothers. Yeah, didn't know that.
Yeah, that's cool. Amazing. So let's switch tack to the Air Force thing. You talked about going through flight training, not making it onto the Tornado. I'd be interested in your reflections on that time, because the reason I say that is when I was flying Jaguars in Germany at that stage, and it was very interesting listening to your reflections about getting into the Air Force. I mean, I've still got a poster that's actually up in one of the rooms in our house, which is the Jaguar Fly It poster, which is without doubt, one of those kind of motivational things that got me into the Air Force. So, and I ended up on Jaguars amazingly, which I was really surprised about. My boss, when I was on 14 Squadron, we were watching you play rugby, and we were sort of watching where's he going to go, and there was a lot of speculation about this, and you're obviously going on to the Tornado. And there was a bit of, oh Christ, it's a bit about how would we manage? It was just one of these hypothetical conversations, in a frontline squadron. If you've got a guy who's playing sport at the highest level, with all that brings in terms of visibility, but also commitment, and losing you for substantial periods of time. I'm just interested in your reflections on all of that, how that ultimately played out. And you talked very clearly about enjoying the Canberra and the Hawk and everything else, and I can completely get that from knowing those airplanes well. But your thoughts?
I finished Valley, so I started Valley April, and I finished sort of September time. But actually, my wings ceremony wasn't until the sort of October time. But they'd already said to me, "We're going to put you on the September FICU course down at Chivner because we want to get you finished before the Five Nations starts in January, February." So literally, they crammed me towards the end of Valley to get all the flying done towards my FHT. In fact, the thing that caused the delay was actually I had to get down to Broady and do night flying, because as you know, at Valley they don't do night flying during the summer months. So I had to detach down to Doc Cresswell. Do you remember Doc Cresswell at Valley?
Yeah.
So the two of us, we detached. I was on 3 Squadron, detached down to Broady just to do literally just day night, get yourself qualified day night, and then you're the night qual, then you're done. So I just had to go solo on a night trip, and so as soon as I bang off. So I went down to Chivner, started. So there's Colin Marchbank, Mike Baverstock, Chris Carter, and a couple of
lots of names from the past there that I remember.
Chris Boyd and Dominic Riley, two F4 guys going to be staff. So there's about 6 of us. And so the courses from basic, then to advanced, and then to Chibnall was like 4 of us, 5 of us, whatever it was. And so I started then. I walked in, I had no wings on because I hadn't been to my wing ceremony yet. All I can remember was the squadron boss going, obviously insert adjective, words as appropriate, but what the hell are you doing? Where's your flipping wings? And I haven't been given them yet. I said, stuff that, go and get them sewn on. So go and get the wings sewn onto my jumper and to my flying suit. So I started that, and when I managed, my dream was to fly Jaguar, so I'm very jealous of you, Bob. The Jaguar was the aircraft that I remember as a kid growing up was the one that I wanted to fly. I think in real reality, I probably didn't think I was good enough to get there, but some of the scoring I was doing towards the end, I always regale to people, and you'll know this, of our generation that did Broady and Chivner. That last trip we did, that last trip of a 2v1 first run attack, TOT, that's probably the sharpest that we all are as pilots, because it is basic Mark 1 eyeball, a low flying chart, you got speedo, heading, and RPM. That was just that. And you, I would have sat, so that was January 86, so I'd have been 22. And you're in charge of this £4 or £5 million piece of kit, and you've got an instructor on your wing, and you're trying to stop being shot down, and you've got to try and hit your low-level bomb on the target at Chivner, and then you go off and do your TOT timing. If you think about what your brain we were doing, that I always look back and think, whether I did a long Air Force career or whatever, the fact that I flew that sortie and passed it, we can hold our head up high, because that is one hell of a skill set we had, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really tough. I mean, the whole system was very hard.
It really was. Although I can honestly say that I've got complete complete sympathy with all the ones that went through sort of before my time, because I went through in 86, well, 85, 86. But anybody, because we were just going through the throes of having the old AHARs set up in the Hawk. Of course, before that, you just turned and pulled 6G. That's it, bang. The old everything tilted and went off. You had to do all the press it back in, that sort of stuff. Nightmare. Compass all over the place. So fortunately for us, we were having the AHAR upgrades on the Hawk, which made it so much better for obvious reasons. So when I got there, it's no surprise really. We did as you remember your role disposal, we did the Apocalypse Now, where they do the Russian roulette. Is it Apocalypse Now?
No, Deer Hunter.
Deer Hunter, that's the one. Yes, Deer Hunter. So we did a beer hunter for hours. So we literally had beer in a watcher with the aircraft around it, and so you picked out whatever you wanted. So I mean, those days we had Bucks, Jags, Harriers, GR1, F3,
Phantoms, F4s.
F4s. Well, 6 of them. Anyway, it was about 6. It was quite a choice, and I was hoping out of obviously, I think it's a Jaguar. And what was interesting was that because I'm a teetotaler, I don't drink, so they had to use Coke cans for my beer hunter thing. And so literally you picked up one of it and you just did the old on there. And if it sort of spurted you, then obviously that was the aircraft you're going on. That was the one we did. Typical things you do when you're in your early 20s. But of course, with a Coke, it's fairly fizzy. So the Jaguar came up, it spurt quite a bit. And they went, no, this one, here, you take this one. So I got picked to go Tornadoes. But by that stage, I got to know Mike Steer and Mike Knight very well. And they just told me already that get through Triple TE and then took you up at Huntington. They'd earmarked me to go and fly for 617. And the thing was, I mean, 617 Marham, it is doable from Marham to Leicester.
Yeah.
But it's still a long trip. And so, I mean, from my perspective, I was already coming to terms with the fact that if I ended up on Tornadoes at 617, I was probably going to retire from rugby. Because it's one of the things, how could you do that? Well, it's my job.
Yeah, it's what pays your salary, yeah.
My job, Monday to Friday, metaphorically speaking, my job was, flying jets for the Air Force. My hobby was playing rugby on a weekend. And, 3 or 4 times a year, you play to Twickenham. But that was, I was very much, at that time, I was minded that, the job came first. And so it was really interesting, I first capped 84 and 86 could have been my last year, potentially.
Yeah, well.
Because I did recognize that, when it's hard enough doing training when you're trying to become a baby budgie, but when you go on to frontline squadron and during your workup, combat ready, it's big juju. So I'd come to terms with it, and of course it didn't materialize because I struggled through Cottesmore. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have. There's very few of us who are, I'd put you up there. Anybody goes and flies a single seat, you're pretty good at most things you do, but like all of us, we're good at some things, and obviously other ones we find much harder. And instrument flying was the one I did find tough. And what was interesting, you sort of think, well, you're going to fly from a Hawk, which has got no head-up display apart from the sights, and you go and fly this electric bomber, which has got enough hieroglyphics in this massive head-up display.
Should be easier.
It should be easy. But there was a few things that took my time, and this is nothing against I had a German instructor who's a nice guy, whatever. I'm quite a visual sort of type learner and more hands-on. And if I was going to go back to myself and say, Rory, go and fully understand how Alpha works and understand how you apply that. But before, it was just power attitude trim. And to a certain extent, that worked. But of course, in the simulator at the time, there was like a six knot difference between the simulator and the real aircraft. That as well as I just did power attitude trim in the simulator, but I didn't actually use it to try and learn. Because when we started, we did a lot of simulator stuff, didn't we?
Yeah, same with every airplane.
Yeah. So you do a lot of simulator stuff to sort of, course, the Tornado being the sort of bright, bushy new aircraft. There was a really good simulator in there, but I didn't. In hindsight, I would have spent more time getting my head around Alpha. And then obviously when you've got the head-up display and you've got the different vertical velocity, such a long time ago since I've done it, and various other things, I look back now and it was tough. And also it's really weird, you go from a Hawk with only a single engine, you think it's tough, but actually it makes your mind fear, because if you lose an engine, you've got to do certain things because you can't. Whereas suddenly you go, I've lost an engine, that's fine, I've got one more.
Mm-hmm.
So those sort of things, the dynamics was slightly different. It took my head around a little time to get used to that. Anyway, long story short, I was having a few problems. They put me on review and they gave me a British instructor, and that helped a lot. It did help a lot. Sadly, I had to go and do obviously we're building up to go cruise solo, and I had to pass the instrument rating. And I flew an absolutely brilliant instrument rating, apart from the fact I did my ILS in 60 wing with the air brakes still out. So yeah, I didn't notice the air brakes were out through the whole of it. So there's a whole bunch of that sort of stuff, and it's like anything else. There's certain things that I would have changed and I could have done better. It's sort of like opportunities arise. Rather than being playing rugby for 2 years, I ended up playing for 12 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's another fork in the road thing, isn't it? It's one of those different opportunity.
86 for me was quite a pivotal year because my sort of Air Force career just took a turn, which meant that I could play the rugby, and I met my future wife. So that was quite a pivotal year at the time from that perspective. And you mentioned about you so many questions about the disappointment. For me, that was a massive disappointment. I was really, I can remember ringing up Mike Steer because Mike Knight had just retired and telling him that I just failed the trip, and I think I went through for a review body thing. I had to answer questions on. And, I walked in thinking it was going to be a normal sort of run-of-the-mill things, but I could tell very long with the questions they were asking me that it was a thinly disguised chop ride, basically, as we call it, as you know. And so, fine, I was so disappointed. And I remember going to see the group captain, the station commander, telling me, right, he's recommended me to go fly Hercules. I was like, look, I'm still flying, so fine. And I sort of resigned to the fact that I was going to fly fast jets, but I was still, flying. But while they were waiting for the process to go through, I was still playing for the Air Force and I was still doing rugby and stuff. So this was like April. And the other thing didn't help. And again, this is not an excuse. The Brits all arrived on the Friday. So we did Friday. But all the Germans and Italians, they arrived on the Monday. So they did Monday to Thursday, which is familiarization for the UK. We arrived on the Friday. That following week, I basically disappeared off because I was playing rugby for the British Lions in the Northern Hemisphere for a week. So the first 4 weeks of ground school, I missed the first week, which didn't help a lot either.
Yeah, I can really imagine that. I mean, if I look back on my own time, I had a pretty torrid time through flying training initially, and then it turned out I was sort of a late developer and ended up, as we talked about, on the Jaguar. But if I reflect on my own journey, I mean, there's no way that I could have dealt with the kind of do something else for substantial chunks of time during flying training and still cope. I would not have made it. So I can completely understand where you're coming from with that. And that it is such a concentrated and still is, to a large degree the same. You've got to focus on it. And if you're being pulled in two different directions, I feel for you. I mean, that's a terrific challenge that you were faced with.
It was. I mean, and I've got 14 hours. I can claim I've actually flown 14 hours in the Tornado. And what was interesting was while I was driving around, I sort of reflect on the fact that I see jets whizzing around at low level, and my dream was to fly low level. I'm a mud mover at heart, so for you as a JAG, I'm very much a in the weeds type of mentality. I'm not an AD guy, and I must admit, as I was going on, I was thinking, I don't really want to fly, Hercules. I know they fly low level and stuff like that, but I didn't really want to go Hercules. And when I got the call from the post to say, look, we decided to send you to Cambridge, I must admit, I was pleased.
Sure, yeah, it was an interesting airplane for a start, an interesting role too.
Pseudo jet, fast jet sort of thing, and it also meant that I knew that there was a potential avenue for me to get back into fast jet later on. So yeah. So I went from a all electric, all singing, all dancing bomber into a 1940s, 50s vintage aircraft.
Where you lock the camera, when you lock the navigator in the nose.
Well, no, that's the PR9, but yeah, I had them in the back because I was to fly through the T-17 on 360 squadron, so I had an EWO and a navigator out the back.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It was PR9, wasn't it, where they locked him in the nose?
But it was, if anybody sees the door was down there, you got in onto a sort of a walk, I say walkway, a crawlway, and then you got onto your seat. If you tell people about the T4, which is the Canberra, the instructor's seat on the right hand side, they used to have to swing it forward into a click to get the navigator into the back. Then at least that swing it as far back as possible to get me as the student into the left-hand seat, and then swing the seat forward into its normal position so that, while it swung back, the instructor then got in, he had to strap in with it sort of being back, and then once he did that, he did the line, he had to help them move the seat clunk into position so the two of us were side next to her. So it was rather cozy. It was a bit shoulder to shoulder in the T4. But yeah, so, I mean, what was interesting, because I technically, officially, I failed tornadoes because of instrument flying. That was the official reason. And so one of the things I remember when I went to fly the Canberra, it was like, oh my God, you've chopped me for instrument flying. You sent me to an aircraft, which instrument flying is like an absolute nightmare. I mean, literally, the artillery horizon was just a black ball with a white line on it.
Yeah, really ancient instruments. Sure, yeah.
I mean, it was, you could say it was Mark One artificial horizon. But it's one of those things I remember. And after a couple of years, I was asked to do, I want to be an instrument rating examiner. And I went, you know what? I do. I wanted to prove to myself that I could take on that next level and overcome the fact that, I was disappointed that I failed.
And did you do that?
Yeah, I became an IRE. And I'll tell you what.
Fantastic.
One of the things that I always talk about, becoming an IRE on the Canberra. I mean, the Canberra rating was like 2-hour trip. I mean, we used to do limited panel UPs, and from the UP last one, they would have to recover to do a tack end to ILS. So I had to do a complete hold, and then a route. Like it was somewhere over the Wash from Whitton, and it was like a 15, 20, I can't remember now, 15, 20 mile arc around to intercept the ILS, and then just as you're approaching the glide path, I would give you back the instruments. We had to do a join onto the tack end hold, one loop on limited panel, and then do the arc around, and then come down to get the ILS. I mean, there's some of the stuff that way to do, and the point I make a lot is when I became an IRE and I sat in the right hand seat of the T4 and I had the squadron normal pilots. Two things hit home to me. A, I'm not as crap as I think I am, and that's not others are crap. You always think I'm not as good a pilot, so you always have those, because you see it from afar. But all that sort of stuff. And of course, when you're sat in an IRE seat, you're not having to fly the aircraft, and as we know, that your capacity's there. Your capacity's got 100% capacity. Doing a bit of lookout because they've got partial and they've got their dot thing on. But you can see. I don't think you spotted the radial coming in. And they'll miss the radial and that sort of stuff. And you're sitting there going, actually, I'm just like everybody else. I'm just a good, solid, average pilot, and there's nothing wrong with that. But actually, it also it improved my awareness and understanding of how to fly myself, because I was seeing all my fellow pilots making all the sort of mistakes that I was making, and I know for a fact that actually improved me as a pilot after becoming an IRE. Two things,
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely sure that's true. And I mean, I remember when I was doing supervisory stuff when I was a flight commander and a squadron commander. You're right. I mean, you see so much more because you can, because and you watch, and you can watch the sort of mistakes unveiling in slow time. Really, I mean, which I always thought was hilarious. I mean, one of my vivid memories was doing a 100-foot low flying duel on a guy who was on the squadron at the time. I'll keep him nameless. Where we were going, what we used to do on that was we'd do a route usually around southern Scotland, low population in the low flying area up there, 20 Tango, and you'd fly the same route about 3 times to basically get familiar with it and allow the sort of comfort zone element to develop for the guy who's doing it for the first time. And you don't really want to fly too much from the backseat at 100 feet because it's quite difficult. But you do a bit of a demo and then you let them get on with it. And of course, initially they're all way, way too high. And what tends to happen as well is the moment you go into a turn, you climb for sure. Because you're just consciously doing that for safety's sake. And then as you get a bit more confident as the front seat student in inverted commas for this, who's doing the duel, then they start getting a bit more punchy and a bit more aggressive with it. And you can watch the kind of unveiling of an imminent challenge to them coming up. And it's when you take control or whether you let them get on with it and make the mistake. And in the Jaguar, if you overbank the Jaguar and then when you roll out, the nose would drop a little bit. So you would lose height if you weren't very careful. And of course, if you're at 100 feet, you've got very little height to lose. So I was watching this. I thought this could be quite interesting in a minute. And sure enough, exactly what I foretold happened, that he overbanked in the turn, pulled really hard to keep the height down. Beautiful, piece of 100-foot flying, rolls out, nose dips, suddenly we're at 80 feet, low height warner going off, blah, blah, blah. And you can argue I shouldn't have done it because I knew it was going to happen. And therefore, ultimately you bust up minimum separation, all the rest of it. But the reality is that he learned far more from that because you let him get on with it and you let him do it than actually if I'd taken control, and in which case he's never seen that. He's never got to that point. And particularly, obviously, as the next thing is you're about to send them off solo, and you only ever do that duel once. So you want them to learn the lesson. Yeah. So no, I totally get that. Hey, we must, for the sake of time, if nothing else, we must jump forward a bit of time in your life.
Sorry, I waffle on a bit too much.
Yeah, no. It's fascinating. It's really great, and so much got my collective memory because we were such a similar time going through all of that. And there's so many things that are very, very familiar. But if you roll forward to out of the Air Force now, out of rugby, obviously as well, you move into what you've been doing since, with a sort of progressive development of a leadership development now into sort of strategic consultancy arena. I'm just really interested in what you've taken from all of that personally, how you've adapted yourself in terms of the big lessons, as it were, and the things that you think are most important from a leadership point of view, either whether they came off the rugby field or whether they came out of the Air Force.
I mean, I've been out 24 years now, and it was interesting. When I first left, all we've known is the Air Force. And so you know a certain mindset, a certain expectation, both of yourself and others around you. You know, it's one of those things, self-discipline is something that plays in my mind all the time. I'm not the world's greatest at it, but it's very much a consciousness, because we know as pilots, self-discipline plays a massive part in trusting each other, etc. And rugby is the same thing, all that sort of stuff. And, the biggest thing I learned within 6 months of leaving the Air Force was the civilian world is built differently. The mindset is different. The expectation is different. And, remember, now, despite me being a box standard average pilot, I'm still top 2% in this country, if not less than that. Because as pilots, there's not many of us in the context of the people in this country. So we're the top 2% of pilots, never mind. But within that cadre, there's also those that are box standard average and those that can, recite high to the 100th degree while they're still flying at low level at 100 feet or whatever. Capacity is such a massive part. Capacity plays a huge part. Their influence of situational awareness, capacity, self-discipline, all that sort of, it's played a big part in my thinkings and musings when I've been doing my work post. And so things like, if I'm going to be late for a meeting, even if it's 5 minutes late, I will still tell somebody when I'm on the way, sorry, I'm going to be late, 5 minutes. And yet most businesses, the meeting is set for a time, but it's something like within the half hour, they may have a meeting. There's a completely different expectation and mindset to it. And that took me a while, It
was one of my big frustrations when I went to Deloitte after I left the Air Force. I did that military thing, you're 5 minutes early for everything because otherwise you're late. And everyone's late for everything. Yeah. And it used to drive me absolutely nuts. It still does to a degree. And
the other one that's self-discipline, if you say you're going to do something, that you do it. And if you can't, you tell somebody. And that's completely alien, Oh yeah, no, I'll get back to you next week. They haven't got back in touch with me. What's going on? I thought it was me, but it's the way it works. So that was a real big eye-opener when I first came in, and myself, when our first company we set up, we used to compare some of the business leaders that we were dealing with people in the military. I remember having a chat with John talking about they're about corporal level, and that's probably being unkind on corporals. It was that sort of, we were just gobsmacked at some of the lack of ability of some people. And of course, the one thing for the 25 years, I ask a simple question of every simple group I go in, who here has had any formal management leadership training?
Yeah, a few hands go up.
And I've been doing it for 25 years, and anecdotally, from all the people in the room, there's less than 10%. Now, whilst you and I have had a lot of management leadership training, it is obviously very military specific, and we're going into a world where the best of the best, we're all highly motivated, and we're all going the same way, same direction. Apply the lack of that into an organization where people have got a whole multitude of different sort of aspirations, sense of loyalties, thoughts of what discipline means, etc. The same old thing. Oh, you're military. You do. You're told what to do and do as you're told. Which, for you and I, and anybody who's listening to this who are ex-military, especially pilots, that is not the case. That is so far from the truth.
Yeah, it's really annoying. It's very, very common that people say that. It's a hierarchical organization. You bark and people just jump, and it's just complete rubbish. It's not the case.
And the thing is, when people say that, I say, okay, so we have a structure. And the bit that people are thinking about saluting and stuff like that, and I say, look, we're not saluting the person, we're saluting Her Majesty. So can we get that off the bat? And once they realise that, they sometimes change their mind. So obviously the commission that we hold, the thinking around how people really understand how to get the best out of each other from the point of view of leading in that respect with regards to that. They don't understand how to do it. They don't have any inkling of what they. Majority of people I go and deal with are a lot of mini me's. They've learned from the people that they've been managed by or led by, and that's being very liberal with the words and meanings. And people just pick up by osmosis. I mean, the University of Osmosis is alive and well, and it's rife in the world. And so the real challenge is that across the business world. Don't get me wrong, there are some great people in there, and I've had a few fortunate businesses I've been into where it's been that person is a great leader, inspirational, great leader, got every single person that would go over the top for that leader, which is a very rarity in the world of business. And I have seen that, but I've also seen a lot of good people. And don't get me wrong, virtually most businesses I go into, there are a lot of good people who want to do right and do good. But the way the whole system, the systemic way the business is set up, and how the lack of ability of leaders at the top to actually point the right way in the North Star, it is severely lacking. It really is.
No, I totally agree. And I see very much the same thing. I mean, I agree with you. I think there are some terrific leaders out there who just happen to be good at it. And they've also got, they've had good role models. They've followed people that are clearly, they've picked the right things up from. And a lot of it is osmosis. People are just picking up well, I've seen someone else do this, so let's try that. And I actually had a session with a company about 18 months ago now, I suppose, where they said exactly what you've been saying. Essentially, they're promoted now to a position where they're running teams and and nobody's given them any tools. They've never had any formal or even informal training that is really equipping them to do the job well. And which inevitably, why would it then go well? It's a real challenge.
So the learning of the years I've gone is that, I'm a fairly pragmatic sort of person, and I like to keep things simple. That's very much been my mantra when I've been doing stuff. And so, as much as a lot of good stuff being done there by a lot of good people that go into the sort of really cerebral sort of thinking around leadership and various things, but I find when I go in to speak to a lot of people in businesses, they're snowed under. They think they're all, firefighting. They don't fully understand what firefighting means, but they think they're all busy, and they just don't realize that if you try and give somebody this sort of concept that they've got to work out and think, should I do A, B, or C? Well, it depends on this, and if that happens, and it's an hour in the month, and all this sort of stuff. If it's too complicated, they won't A, have the wherewithal to try and do it, and they can't. So my mantra's always been is keep it as simple as possible. Make it pragmatic to the level and size of the business and the person that you're talking to, and also make it tangible. People just like to get their teeth into it. It's just something about that. The vast majority, that's my experience of the work that I've been doing, and I've been doing work with all different types of things across the board in the private sector. So that's not specific to one area, say finance or whatever. It's across the board. And sometimes people just go, keep it simple because I want to, if this, then that. Okay, I can work with that. And that's the biggest thing I've found. The lack of clarity around the phrase, the North Star. Is it very clear the direction we're trying to go together? Once that's clear, just the lack of ability of organizations to get the best out of their people. They don't train them, they don't invest in them, they don't make it clear about the jobs. And the number of people I come across who started out in a job and they're doing a different job, but they've never had a discussion with their line managers about what's their job now. So there's the wrong person in the wrong job with the wrong skill set at the wrong time. This is quite a common scenario.
Yeah. The other thing I see quite a bit is people get promoted and whoever their boss is actually just wants them as a higher paid what they were before. They don't necessarily want to give them more responsibility. They don't want to give them more kind of opportunity per se. And the delegation and empowerment thing for them to actually develop the people underneath them is a really challenging area that, I work on, use a lot of leadership examples of stuff I've done. So I say, you've got to get better at this. If you're not comfortable with it now, you've got to find a way of making yourself more comfortable with it, because you cannot exist without taking the safety net away from the people that actually work for you, so that they feel that they are developing and they're giving an opportunity to shine, and they will shine if you allow them to.
Well, there is a very opposite point, Bob. The number of people I go into who are frightened of building a strong team around them. If I challenge any leader, I say, what's your role? Delivering on a strategy, shareholder value, well, that's what I say, do yourself out of a job. Build a team around you that will do the running of the business you want it to do. That then allows you to go and do what you should be doing, which is forward thinking, strategy, M&As, all that sort of stuff, being an ambassador for the business and get us to. But no, people are very reluctant to do that because they think they should be doing it. And of course, if you apply the Peter principle, that same thing applies as well. Everybody is promoted to the level of incompetence. And that is so true across the board. That there I see so many times when I go and deal with senior executives and in big businesses, that they've got there because they're very good at doing. Because as they've been moved along the way, they're not taught how to manage your lead, so they just keep doing. And that only works so far because you get to a certain point in an organization where you have to manage, if not lead. And they don't have to do that, they keep doing. And that's when their performance drops down.
Yeah, and they stay too focused on management and not enough on leadership, I think. And they stay too in their own comfort zone some of the time with, I know how to do this. I've been promoted and successful on the basis of doing this. Therefore, I'll keep doing that. Whereas actually, as you get broader and broader and broader and you've got a bigger team, you can't do that. You've got to let people do it for you and fully step away from it and not micromanage them.
The point is, they don't know. They don't know anything different.
Yeah.
That's the problem because most businesses I go into, they very minimal training. So when I first came into the business world, I used to, first in the military, it was always pointed at you. What are you doing to know about that? Do this, get yourself promoted, do that. The expectation is you to drive that. You go into the civilian world, it's not. And I used to point the finger at the individual. So you got, but of course, when you actually go into it, the business is not set up to let you know what the next level is. It doesn't tell you what you need to do. So actually that I've flip-flopped around that now. And so the first person I point the finger at when I go into an organization is the organization set up to enable the person to understand what they need to do, how they need to do it, when they need to do it, why they need to do it, etc. And then if they don't, then I point the finger at the individual.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of all the people that get to the top there, they've never been taught. They've never been told that anything wrong. Did a good job, basically because you hit the numbers. So that whole thing around, as long as you hit the numbers, then you're doing a good job, which does my head in. There is a difference between being a successful business team from the point of view of I'm hitting our numbers and a successful team in the dynamics of how a team works. And all of us have been in those sort of situations know that's the difference. But a lot of people in the business world don't get that. If they're making the numbers, they're a good team. If they're not making the numbers, they're a poor team.
Yeah, and I think at an individual level, actually, that's also true. I mean, quite a lot of leaders are, I mean, if you look at the corporate world, generally they're hired because of experience and qualifications. They're trained to do whatever they need them to do in the business. And if they're successful at doing that thing, selling, for example, then they get promoted. And they'll continue to get promoted because they're good at selling. No one actually ever takes into consideration that wider, okay, what's the rest of the team dynamic bit for the leader? Just because you're driving and you've got significant profits and all the rest of it, you may have people in the team who are, their morale's dreadful. They really don't enjoy what they're doing. They don't feel fulfilled and all the rest of it. And I just think that's such, I mean, it might make the company financially successful, but it's not a nice company to work for. And I think, interestingly, one of the changes I'm seeing a little bit now is not least with working with Deloitte University, as I do, where lots of youngsters in the bottom end of that organization who are coming in with a different set of values and a different set of challenges that they're imposing on the leadership who I'm tending to interact with at the sort of senior manager director level. The senior managers and directors are finding it hard, but that's a good thing because actually I think they've got to turn around and write, okay, what can we do that makes this work? Because these guys are the future of the workforce. So they've got to find a way to turn around and embrace them and bring them on board and maybe shape them a bit because some of the things they want to do and feel they've got to do are not necessarily helpful. And that doesn't work. But it is. I think it's a really interesting dynamic with the sort of current structure.
It is because they've never been trained in management leadership. They don't know how to do it. And the Peter Principle is just another way of saying the old adage, the best salesperson doesn't have to make the best sales manager. And everybody acknowledges that, but they don't actually think of how to actually apply that dynamic in the context of work. And so you find a lot of very, very average managers dealing with lots of very, very difficult situations haven't got the skill set to do it.
No, totally so.
And they just revert back. They revert back to doing and telling people what to do. And one of my sayings I say all the time, the number of times people use the situation, it's just quicker for me to tell them how to do it.
Or do it myself.
And it's short-term gain, long-term pain. Well, the whole thing there, and I use the phrase, a short-term gain, it's quicker, easier, whatever, I just have to do it. A short-term gain is a long-term pain, because if you use that behavior all the time, then the organization is predicated to be told, well, I'm waiting for you to tell me what to do now, boss.
Yeah.
Okay. As opposed to short-term pain, which is, right, I'll brief you and go and do it. You might make a mistake or whatever, but we want you to learn from your mistakes. When they get it, it's a long-term gain.
No, 100%. And sometimes you have to do the short-term pain thing because it is a really tight deadline or it's really critical or whatever. And I mean, and that realistically, that is the only way to do it. But where you've got opportunities, and all organizations have opportunities to take that extra time, allow more flexibility, allow the development of people, and the upskilling of people as well, individually and collectively as a team, so they get better. Totally agree.
That's the ideal. But a lot of people go, I haven't got time, haven't got the money, haven't got the resources, can't afford to do it, need to get the numbers sorted out. So they go for the quick win.
Yeah. No, totally see that. So just before we close this and move to something else, Wingman, with what you're doing now, what are you doing? What could your clients expect from you, coming in?
So over the years that I've been dealing with lots of senior teams, one of the things that we get them, the dynamics, I'm very confident I can say that I'm a team builder. That team, after we've done a few sessions with them, they're so much more together as a team, much more united and aligned as a team. But one thing that was still becoming fairly obvious is when they started talking about strategy, if I was in there in the board meeting, whatever, they didn't really fully exhibit an understanding of what the strategy was, especially from an aligned perspective. What I saw was a lot of people just cherry picking what they had to go and do, and they just go off and do their own thing. So that's the strategy, yes, but I'm going to go do my sales bit, I'm going to do my HR bit, I'm going to do my engineering bit, I'm going to do my operations bit, whatever. And actually, what I was finding that systemically an organization pretty much starts out as a siloed organization as soon as the whole board walk out of that board meeting. Even though we're just talking about strategy and how we're going to do it, every single person has walked out, and I'm being very generic, obviously, sweeping statement, but everybody's walked out and they just go and do their own thing. So what tends to happen is they'll go, sales will do this. He or she will go and talk to their teams. Say, this is what we're going to do. And each of their sales managers will go for, I'll do that bit then, and they'll deliver that. So actually, cascading wise, there's a very clear vertical sort of drive down through an organization, but is very, very siloed. And so the biggest thing I find in every single organization I go into from year dot is that cross-functional ways of working across the business is inherently poor. Part of the reason is, well, the major reason is because of that, everybody's got competing priorities. So yeah, no, I'll collaborate with you, but in my head, I'll go, I will, but I'll make sure I get my bit first.
Yeah.
So straight away, you have competing priorities. And so you're never going to get that dynamic of collaboration and working together. And so it goes back to when I left, the big thing was people were just concentrating on the what all the time. What I've got to do, what number I've got to achieve, what's the next big thing I've got to sort out, as opposed to the how. When I asked people the question, do you think that England in the 90s, when we were having success, that we just turned up and just played and didn't really talk to each other and didn't do any practicing and team drills and that sort of stuff? Do you think I just jumped into a jet, went flying and didn't worry about air traffic control, operations, safety scrippers, all that sort of stuff? You and I know from the Air Force perspective, there is a team that enables us to get off and airborne safely, and the same in the rugby. And so, we, metaphorically, I use the sort of, we probably spend 90% of our time training, preparing to go and fly a 1 hour sortie, as an example. We spend 90% of our time training and discussing and talking about how we're going to play the game before a 1 hour, 20-minute game, which is about 10%, obviously, 10% flying. So how does that work in the business world? Well, whenever I talk to people, everybody flip-flops the other way around.
Yeah, at least, yeah. I mean, it's probably 98-2, isn't it?
At least. And that, because what happens is I use the 10. The 10% is training, preparing, whatever. But actually, majority of that, I say 9% of the 10% is inherently governance, compliance, has to do training, and there's not much development doing. And the development is like 1%.
Yeah. No, I'll be totally with you on that.
And so you go, well, there's a real dichotomy between the whole concept of what we're trying to do as a business and how we do it as a business, do it effectively. And that's the bit that they can't quite get their head around. And that's where I come in. So there's the clarity of that, but it's united and aligned and communicated so that everyone understands it, and it's done in a way that's very simple to go. So keep it simple, the one page. And then from the how, cross-functional relationships, how do we engender from the senior team at the top that cascade of we're all working this together? And so the clarity is making sure that people understand it's not your target that's the most important. Yes, yours has an importance, but the important target is the big one at the top here. So you've got to understand how you do what you do, but how everybody does what they do makes this bit work. If all you're going to concentrate on just doing that to get my number and not everybody else, you're going to struggle getting there.
Yeah, no, it's really, really helpful. Thanks. Rory, I'd like to switch it back to talking about you a little bit and your journey, as it were, and some of your own experiences. And just to start that off, if you were looking backwards now and advising a school-age Rory on your future journey, what would you be saying to him?
From a school age, I always find it hard. I mean, as any of us do when we get older, you could always, when you look back, you always know you could have done more. You could always done a bit more revision. You could have done a bit more practicing. You could have been a bit more into that. You could always done a bit more. And I'd apply that in my flying. I know we discussed about the challenges of me doing my flying and the route at the same time, but even in my rugby and various things, I look back and whether I was just trying to balance out everything so I didn't become consumed by never mind one thing, but two things. And that was my get out of just pacing it in a way that I knew I could get through. But you could always go, I have a pass off my left, a spin pass off my left hand. I was an average kicker. I wouldn't say many better than that. Out of hand, I could have practiced more with that sort of stuff. I look back and think I could have discussed things more. I was somebody who was, I think, always tried to solve things in my head or just do what I did and trying to do it better. Probably what I didn't do enough of was to discuss things with more people, to just have a chat about this and chat about that and dissect it. I don't know whether I wasn't that sort of person at a young age. Whereas now, because we become older and wiser, with more experience, you realize, like anything else, start recognizing the fact that you don't know what you don't know, and that's quite frighteningly a lot. And so trying to explore that finance. So the older I've got, I've become more fascinated with understanding, trying to seek to understand things and asking questions, understand the other point of view, the other thing, the other things I don't understand, the other things that I see and try to comprehend, etc. I suppose there's always that you could have done a bit more type scenario. And I probably didn't ask enough people, not so much help, but, talking to people about things to sort of try and broaden your knowledge and understanding and skill set.
Yeah, it makes sense. It completely does. I mean, I think all of us get, as you say, you get wiser and more considerate of the wider world around you and think about, I suppose, asking more questions and as you say, seeking to understand. Whereas you do when you're young and immortal, you just jump straight in. Yeah. And I think we're all like that, which is probably a good thing to some extent in some of the things that we used to do for sure. But I totally reconcile.
Well, those things you sort of think, I'd fly and that sort of stuff, and we debrief that sort of stuff. And that as I got more and more in the Air Force, as we all debrief at the end of the sorted stuff, that became part of my thing. So I always think about things and think about could I have done that better and stuff like that. That's become indelibly put into our minds and indoctrinated to a certain extent. But I suppose in early days of fly, then I used to get out of the flying mode, jump into a car, and I'd be driving off for an hour to go rugby training. So I'd have to sort of take out that cassette and then put in the rugby cassette and go play rugby. So there's a bit of that was happening. So whether that was the case or not, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really true. I mean, highs and lows is the other area I tend to focus on with individuals here. And I start that off by saying, is there anything when you look backwards? And it's always a bit hypocritical for me to ask this because I don't really look backwards. I tend to look forwards. I'll have an occasional glimpse back and think, could I have done this differently? Or was that a moment where I should have made a different choice? But I don't really do it very often myself. But I always ask my my interviewees, is there anything you would have done differently when you look back, and if so, why?
Similar to you, I tend to look forward. I'm half full. I'm an optimistic type of guy, but it doesn't mean I don't think about the past. Is there anything that I would specifically change? Not as in that thing I would have done this 100% differently or whatever, but in the same way what we just talked about. If I think about if I talked to people more, done this, we talked about my being chopped at and the tornado. And if I'd spent more time talking to people and various other things and trying to learn, understand those things more, I probably could have got through that in a much better way. There are things that happen in games. I mean, I'm always reminded about, hey, people think it was me playing against John Olomu in 95, which is my brother, but I'm also get reminded by the 93 game against Wales when Ian Evans got past me to kick the ball and score a try, and we lost that game. So those sort of things. And in answer to your question, there's elements of, I may not think about it, but I get not constantly reminded, but every now and then there are people who quite happily, oh, what happened in that game when you did this and whatever. And it's part of being a known, and I'm not going to use the word celebrity or personality, but a known sports person, that people see you and see you on the pitch. And when they talk to you or regale, they obviously then think about their memories of what they remember from X, Y, and Z. And for like a lot of people, they want to know why, what, where, when, what happened. And they sort of think that they're asking a question that they want to know, but has never been asked before. But everybody's thinking the same thing. And that's part of the territory that I'm in. That I get asked, the most common question I get asked is, what's it like facing Jonah Lomu? With a slight, smirk on their face, because they think that I was the one that was treated rather badly by him. I never got anywhere near him, bless him. Tony was the one who took the punishment there. But there's other mistakes. But of course, I was always reminded by a coach who was very, very influential in my career. He was Yorkshire coach, became the North of England coach, and he became the England coach in the Lions. So I've known Jeff Cook for many, many years through my playing years, from when I started playing rugby at 18 or 19 in representative all the way till I retired. He's been there or thereabouts. And at the end of the day, I played 85 games for England. I scored 49 tries for England. And I got huge amounts of highs, winning Grand Slams, getting to World Cup finals, winning crucial matches, winning Triple Crowns, winning big test matches, all that sort of stuff. And yet sometimes people always want to pick out the one or two little things that are, well, little, but are the sort of, the downside of things. What about that World Cup in 91? Why did you change this? What did you go to that? Do you think Campo should have been, sent off for that deliberate knock on, blah, blah, blah. But that's the beauty of sport. That's the way those things work. And people want to find out your thoughts and your views. And for some people, they're sort of like taking it and just gone, woof, don't want to talk about that because it was a low light. But part and parcel of, our life, and this, as all of us aircrew do, not only the lessons we learn from us flying and doing things where you go, there, but for the grace of God, I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to do something differently next time, as we've all done. I'm sure we've all had our private moments, some which we've talked about and some which we haven't. But the same thing applies in rugby and playing games, or whether it's for big international sides or for club rugby, as well as just life in general, with friends, families, loved ones, etc. There's always something like that. And one, whether I picked it up from somewhere, whether I made it up, I don't think I made it up, or somebody said it to me, I don't know. But one of life's truisms that I try and live by, and I use the word try, is the only mistake you'll ever make is one you never learn from.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, and it is that failure thing often is where you learn the most, isn't it? And you pick up and go, all right, that didn't go so well, but what can I take from it? And how do I, and somebody said something similar to me the other day. It's not how hard you fall, it's how quickly you get back up. And I think, and I think that's absolutely right. It is, if you get knocked down and you get back up again and you get knocked down again for the same reason, then maybe think a little harder about whether there's something I could have done that would change that. But and maybe if you're continuing to get knocked down for the same thing all the time and you haven't been able to change it, then you need to think about, am I fundamentally doing something wrong here? But but by and large, it is, you pick up more from your mistakes than your successes, really. In amongst all your huge number of highs, of which I can well imagine there will be an awful lot, is there any single one that stands out?
Yeah, I do get this question a lot, and I've got highs, obviously, and there are a variety of reasons. I asked the other question I asked, which is your favourite try for England? And I got 49 to pick from. And the thing is, I've got several favourite, and they're not for the same reason. So I can't put a top 10 because there's a context to why they're the favourites in the same way, So one of my highlights is that I did play in a World Cup final. I played in the 91 World Cup final against Australia. But it's also one of my lowlights because we lost the game.
Yeah.
And it's not so much a regret. We tried our best at the time. Could have done things differently. There's a huge, debate about change of tactics. But fundamentally, We didn't play as well as we could do. Australia played slightly better than us, and they won it 12-6. But what might have been, what could have been that day, we could have been champions of the world in 91, 12 years before England did it in 2003. But notwithstanding that, it was still a highlight. Meeting the Queen, playing at Twickenham, without a doubt, that tournament with England getting to a final, it was an experience for British sports fans, never mind rugby fans, to see an England side being so much on terrestrial TV, getting to a final. Whereas with the football's taking so long and various other things. So that really stands in my mind. But obviously, from my perspective, getting my first, I'm talking just rugby, my first cap, my first try, my second game, getting a hat trick. I scored 5 tries against Fiji. And we've won 3 Grand Slams. And some of those games are some of the games that we played, especially the first one against France in 91. Some of those victories, beating New Zealand in 93 at Twickenham. So there's all those sort of things that stand out as being highlights. And to be honest with you, there's a long, it's not a specific time. I would say that period of the 90s where you could argue sort of 88, 89 through to sort of 95, 90, well, sort of 96, that period when people regard as the Will Carling, England's success years. We won 3 Grand Slams, World Cup final, and a couple of championships. That period of those players I played with was an absolute pleasure. And that's between 88 and 96. Of my 49 tries, I scored 45 of them.
Wow. Yeah.
So you could tell that success because the team was so good. We worked as a team. I got the ball and was able to do what, I was picked to do. And that was only because I was part of a good team. And, you're talking about it from a flying perspective. Like yourself, I'm a mud mover. I used to love the challenge of flying at low level, being on time, the combat and evasion at low level. 100 Squadron was an absolute dream for me. And, the epitome of when I say, do I miss the Air Force? I miss parts of the Air Force. I don't miss it. I don't crave you back in the Air Force, but I miss the flying. 100% miss just jumping into a Hawk and a jet and just go off and fly for an hour on your own at low level. We were very privileged. And I just remember we were detached up to Lossiemouth for 2-3 weeks while 100 Squadron was moving. I think it was when we moved from Witten up to Finningley. We moved to Finningley for 2 years before we ended up at Leeming. And so they moved the squadron up to Lossiemouth for 2-3 weeks on detachment while they moved the squadron. Did a lot of flying up there with a lot of the northern squadrons, and we had a lot of SCT. So, if there's a spare jet and a spare time, we could go off and just do a bit of, SCT training at low level. And I can remember getting airborne literally 8 o'clock out of Lossiemouth. And it was a beautiful autumn day. We moved up there, July or August, something like that. It was a beautiful autumn day. It was blue sky, not a breath of wind. Got airborne out of Lossiemouth, and so obviously in low level within 30 seconds of getting airborne. And I was going down the Great Glen, and the water was so flat. The colours of the loch and the glen was just beautiful, as you can imagine, orange and purples and greens and yellows. There was waterfalls coming off, and it was so flat that the mirror of the whole glen in the loch was just pristine. And I can remember flying down the valley going, I did use a swear word. I do apologise to your listeners, but I can't believe I'm fucking being paid to do this. It was always an epiphany. Not epiphany is the wrong word, but it was just, I always reflect back on that. That's what and people think, for some people it's a bit more, it's like you're making a lot of noise and annoying people and all that stuff. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't for the sake of just that. There's a lot to it, as we all know, that fly low level of trying what we're doing to get where we need to do on time, etc. But it was the whole aspect. It was, I look back on it and I sometimes remember, did I actually do it such a long time ago? And yes, we were given such a responsibility to go and fly at low level to do what we need to do, to go and do the stuff that at some point we were asked to go and do, the inevitable in a war scenario. But that's one big thing about the flying that really just stands out for me.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think there were many's the day when I thought I should be paying them, not being paid, for some of the stuff that we got to do. It was an extraordinary privilege to, to rush around with your hair on fire at 250 feet or less and doing all the things that we did. It was incredible fun. On the people front, I mean, one of the things people often ask me is, do you miss the Air Force? I did nearly 35 years in the end, and I say, yeah, of course I miss bits of it, but I don't miss the whole of it. I'm glad I left at the time I did and all the rest of it. The thing I miss is the people. And to the team dynamics thing you talked about, that really purple patch when you were with England.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably the bond between the players at that point is really, really strong. I mean, and does that persist beyond that? Do you still kind of in touch with all these guys and have a very close link?
Well, we see a few people. I think the question you asked is analogous to what I found, whether it's rugby, Air Force, and in business. You know what it's like. We transit through our career and we go through different squadrons and or aircraft, and we go up the levels, etc., like that. And so, at certain points, you'll know on a squadron when you've been there 2 or 3 years, you get a certain core that you've been there for the whole time you were there, and you make some really good friends, and then you move on. And sometimes you lose touch with those friends, and you move on, and you go somewhere else. You make another bunch, but it's quite transitory. And rugby's the same. I played for 12 years, and the squad of players that I played in my first game in the 84 was completely different to the one that I finished in 96. And of course, as each year went past, there was always going to be one or two players that either retired, got injured, weren't selected, and some new ones coming in. There's all that transitory stage. And the same with businesses. You have that core element of different companies you work for and departments, etc., as you move around. And like anything else, there is a third of the people that just disappear. You don't touch base with them. They have no interest in the Air Force. They leave the Air Force. They don't want to talk about flying. They don't, that's my life before. Got nothing to talk about. Same with rugby. Some players, that's it, done rugby. I'm going to go and do my life and go and retire and whatever it is. And business the same. Whereas you've got some that you bump into and you see people and, touch points and you make a bit more activity to do that. Then you've got the others that are core elements. And of course, depending which part of the country you are, it depends on whether you are seeing a lot of people. So obviously some of the guys that live in Leicester, because I'm only an hour away from Leicester, I see them, a lot more for obvious reasons. And then if I go down to Twickenham and go to watch a game, then I tend to bump into some of the England boys here and there, or certain charity dinners. The Air Force less so, but obviously with my involvement as an RAF association ambassador, and I get invited down to Riyadh as well. Through that, then I do catch up with ex-Air Force people and buddies, and I've got one or two, my Air Force buddies who I do keep in touch with. There's one or two that I know that weren't air crew, but I played rugby with. So, I've got a few people from the rugby side that I never worked with, but I played rugby with them for the Air Force that I do keep in touch with. So there is a variety, as you can say, but, some of those strong bonds, as especially, the similarities between that trust and that teamwork and that esprit de corps that you have when you gel together as a team and become successful, and you get both the sort of the technical bits of what you're trying to do as a rugby team, but also that team bonding bit, the implicit trust that you have, and what we worked hard towards in the Air Force, that because of the institution we were, everybody's predicated towards that. When you get that right, you do. When you're trusting your life with each other, you're trusting the way you play the game with each other, put a lot of that into each other that you do. You sometimes create bonds for life.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's so true often with conversations with sports people of all sorts of different sports and the kind of military world. There is a lot of linkage between those, because I think that kind of the team ethos is so important in both those kind of worlds. More so, I think, than generally the case in the corporate world, for sure, where I think it's a bit more flighty, because you don't have the same kind of level of commitment, reliance really on your teammates for success, and in many instances, certainly in the military world, obviously, to look after your life. So yeah, it's definitely a thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one, because I do touch upon that if I do any speeches, or when I make sort of analogy and stories, because people sort of say, well, you have to trust each other because your life depends on it. And of course, in sport and in business world, your life doesn't. Well, I sort of say sometimes, but in business, there are certain businesses where lives are lost.
Sure.
So whether it's the construction industry, utilities, in manufacturing, there's all different sort of areas that potentially, people do lose their lives. And sometimes how people work and operate and how they look after each other, whether they're good at doing their brother's keepers element of working with each other or not, they can have an impact. And so I do think it's important. It's my biggest thing that, something we talked earlier on about, that sort of biggest difference between the military and the corporate world. And I do sometimes think that corporate world is very much built around, and I get it, don't get me wrong. I've been out, I'm a corporate beast from the last 25 years, having been out of the military. But yes, profit is not an ugly word for me. And profit is what, we're trying to create. in that capitalist world of trying to create business and create profit so you can generate and invest and improve and build and grow your business. But of course, that predicates a sort of behavior of trying to then make sure you're successful purely and simply from making money. And so that drives the behavior of everything needs to be measured based on money. And so success and failure, a lot of the time, is assessed, judged, decisions on whether you keep somebody or not. A lot of it is just tainted around simple, are you hitting your targets or not? And of course, most targets tend to be financially based because it's easy to measure and it's black and white. Whereas we know, especially from the military sense, definitely from the sports sense, that a lot of it is also about how individuals work together in teams and how teams work with other teams. That is so important in being able to enable an organization to work as efficiently, as effectively as possible. And too much of it is just assumed as being, well, we'll just go to the pub and get pissed. If there's a problem, we'll just go to the pub and sort it out. And that's too simplistic, way too simplistic. And as much as a few things have been sorted out in the pub at happy hour in the Air Force, a lot of it's down to a lot of hard work and talk and some honest, challenging conversation with each other about how, why we do things the way we want to do, that we do it safe, and we get to a position where we can trust everybody when we get out of bed and we jump into an aircraft and we know we've got somebody on a wingtip flying 400 miles an hour, and we don't have to question whether we trust that person or not. And whether you've got somebody on your team that has put all the effort and put all the work and is doing everything they need to do so that all of us can sort of enjoy our success together collectively, while at the same time people in businesses, do they fully understand what they're all trying to do together collectively and working together as an organization to deliver success for the business? Because all I see at the time is so much inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and lack of collaboration. As much, could be so much better in business to enable everything to be done, well, same way, same day. It's an expression all of us in the military understand. So, being on the same hymn sheet and doing it in a way that we make life much easier. So one of our strapline from my business is, do you want to fly higher and faster with less effort? And if I say that to you, you won't even, in your mind, you're thinking about something, whether it's aerodynamics or whether you think about business or whether you're thinking about whatever. Your interpretation of that is your interpretation perception. And it doesn't make a difference because everybody has it slightly differently.
Sure.
But able to fly higher and faster, you can interpret that, whether it's to be a bigger company, a larger company, a more profit company or whatever. But the operative one at the very end is with less effort. And that's the bit where it comes down to how do we get people in business working as effectively as possible. And that's where I think the corporate world has a lot of work to do.
Yeah, interesting. And just prompts another question in my head actually around the changes in business, particularly since COVID, the kind of advent of hybrid working. I mean, it wasn't a thing really. I mean, people occasionally work from home. Now, obviously, it's very normal that people are doing that a substantial amount of time, in some instances, virtually all the time. In the work I do with teams and developing individuals on this as well, I do have a slight worry in my head that team cohesion is going to, in the long term, suffer if the balance isn't right there somewhere, because I think it is quite difficult. It's not impossible at all to build teams remotely. I did it in COVID and it worked very well. But I think it's a more challenging environment, particularly for those who haven't grown up working in teams. And if they're effectively stepping into the workplace and they're going straight into that world, as obviously anyone joining the workforce now is. I mean, what are you seeing? Are you seeing something similar? Or
to a certain extent, I am. When you've got a situation where people haven't got the proper management skill set to understand how to manage teams, and then you add the complication of, oh, by the way, we're going to work hybrid, and some of the time you'll be and some of the time you're not. Trying to manage that dynamic as well adds another extra level of complexity to it all. So as a principle, working from home, I'd say, yeah, I've no problem with it per se. But like anything else, I work from a principle of everybody has a part to play, and whatever the organization feels is the right way for this organization to work, to get the best out of everybody, to contribute towards the success of the business. And ideally, we should work towards that. And I do sometimes find that, and this is getting quite sort of with social, political, or whatever, but there's an element of, I mean, I haven't seen the numbers. I've never seen, I need to go onto the website and look up the ONS and find out. But how many people of working age actually have the ability to be able to work from home if they wanted to?
Mm.
Because there is a huge swathe of our working population that cannot work from home.
Oh yeah, of course. Anyone manufacturing or customer facing of any sort. Yeah.
Yeah, hospitality,
Yeah.
hospitality, retail. There's all that sort of stuff. So there is a huge percentage, and my gut feeling is it's quite a lot that can't work from home. And so there's this huge, massive national debate, well, internationally, you could argue, debate about whether you can. That only impacts probably a minority of the people that work from now. That's a guess. I'll be standard corrected if that's the case. And of course, then when you knock that down as to, well, who does want to work from home? Because it's like anything else. Some people prefer to work from home, but some people don't prefer to work from home. And one of the things, the other question I've got is like anything else, does that then sit with what is ideal for the company, be able to do the job it wants to do? And being, again, this is just my experience. So, if people want to shout at me for whatever, this is just what I've been picking up. So I'll stand to be corrected. But I do tend to find a lot of the commentary around, well, working from home works for me. It works for my lifestyle. And there tends to be a lot of I, me type language involved in that sort of stuff. And I'm being very generic and very sweeping, but there's a lot of that. And like anything else, if you are in an organization, you are part of a team and also teams within organizations. And so what might work for you may not necessarily work for other people in your team or your organization. And so trying to work out how to blend. So that's part of what I try and help with a lot of managers and such like, is to try and work out how to get the best of everybody to discuss and work out how's the best way to do it. So one I came across, somebody just takes Friday off. He just has Friday off. That's the arrangement he has, and he works from home. And they all agreed that they were going to have a meeting on a Friday, and then suddenly the bloke didn't turn up. And he's like, where is he? Well, he works from home. We're having this meeting, and he agreed we would have this meeting, but he's working from home. And so there's an element of it, and is that understanding of compromise, of work to the greater good, and this stuff. And the point I'm trying to make is there's an element of it's trying to work out how compromise across the individual, the whole, and it's a complicated equation between the individual, the team, and the organization to try and get that balance right for as many people as possible. And that's the difficulty. And when you get certain of the extreme sort of views, whereas I will do what I think is right for me and it works for me, and I'm going to do this because it's my right, to an extent, okay. But then what's the impact on the business? And so that's one of the interesting challenges that managers and leaders have got to face. And it's a very difficult situation for them.
I mean, interestingly, the area I think there's a real dilemma for companies is where they've got a mix of people that can work from home and people that absolutely can't work from home. I was at a session in Deloitte actually recently where it was Foster's, the architects, who were talking about their model makers who obviously can't work from home, but they've got lots of other people who can work from home. And so you end up with this kind of us and them culture, which I think is a really big challenge for organizations in that space, because inevitably over time, the risk is that fosters a bit more acrimony, division, etc., which is not what you want. You want more cohesion, not the other way around.
I mean, to be honest with you, there's always been examples of that. And I use examples like salespeople on the road a lot, and they travel around a lot, and there's other people stay at home a lot. There's some people that are perceived to have preferential treatments because, again, sales type people, performance remunerated type people, they go to lots of conferences, they go to lots of events, taking their clients to this, that, and the other type thing. And then you've got all the back staff and all the important support people that work to make sure everything runs efficiently. They don't see that. I can remember one business, it was a conveyancing business. Just talk about all the conveyances, they all have this fun and games and do all this sort of stuff. And they did this one thing where all of them did this, exciting team building day, but they did it outside the office building, and all the support staff who weren't part of that department never had anything like that. That went down very well.
Yeah, challenging, isn't it? Very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, just jumping back to you again, we talked about high points, but what's the career low point for you, and what did you learn from it?
Career. What are we talking about? When you say career, I mean,
well, pick your career.
Technically, rugby wasn't a career. I didn't think of my rugby. I don't think there's a rugby career. But obviously, Air Force and my business is a career. So just qualifying.
Yeah, and I guess either one of those. If you had to pick one point that's a kind of your real low point, which one?
Lowest point for me in the Air Force was being chopped from tornadoes.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it earlier on, and I talked about that. So there's not much more to say. It was a real, for somebody at the age of 23, I think it was something like that, 22, 23, to suddenly have your dream pulled out from you. It was a massive disappointment, huge disappointment. I think to answer the question directly, what to learn from that, but it boils down, you could always done more. And that resilience of once I got over the disappointment was, okay, whichever aircraft I want to go and make sure I do right, and prove that I am an okay pilot, decent pilot, whatever.
As you said earlier, though, interestingly with that, I mean, that is a classic. You get knocked down by that, but actually it opened up all sorts of other opportunities for you because, I mean, your rugby career flourished as a result of that.
And, you could argue one of the things is, a disappointment, then opportunities may rise, and you need to take those opportunities. So, take them when you can. All of us I don't think there's anybody who never went through the whole of their flying career that didn't either fail a trip, fail a test, or had a bad trip and they knew they had a bad trip, whether they failed it or not, or did something where they scared themselves SH1 And are we, the ones that have succeeded in becoming pilots and had a career as being pilots, and especially those that managed to avoid, unfortunately, getting into an accident for whatever reason, we've learned by those, and therefore, for the grace of God, we've managed to get through an occupation that is obviously slightly higher in the sort of risk category than lots of other jobs that you can do. So it's like anything else. We talked about before about the only mistake you'll ever make is one you never learn from. It's always an opportunity. Take them when you can. What resilience do you have, etc. All those sort of things. It builds us as characters as we go on through our lives. I think one thing that I do hold, true. Debriefing in the Air Force is something the corporate world does not do. The corporate world does not debrief. The corporate world, the boss will decide whether it's good or bad and then tell the minions what they should do better. That is at best. It is 100%. They do not debrief. And so the amount of reinventing the wheel, the amount of making the same mistakes, etc., are just littered across the corporate world. And it's one area that they don't do very well at all.
I totally agree. And I talk about that quite a lot, actually. I did a podcast just very recently with an American guy who's actually an ex-F-15 and F-22 pilot, he's written a book called Debrief to Win, because one of his big things is exactly this, that you can learn so much more and do so much better if you actually do focus on capturing what's gone on in the immediate past. And how do you learn from it? How do you get better? What's the continuous improvement mechanism?
100%. And of course, they're too busy. They're ring on headless. And of course, why? Because of the inefficiency we talked about before. They're more efficient. They thought more strategically. They'd give themselves more time, and they can do that sort of stuff, and they can avoid these things happening in the future. So, the world is very reactive in the corporate world, too reactive at times. And constantly, what I'm trying to do is help them to get ahead of the drag curve, so they can be more proactive. And that's a big challenge, as you know. I mean, like anything. So I've run two businesses. The first one, as you know, and I saw your podcast, I saw it on LinkedIn today, came out with John. John and I, when we started the first company, it's our first company. We learned every day. We learned something, but we trusted each other with a sort of, there was three of us that are ex-military. So we trusted each other. We had our jobs to do, and we got on. And we did really well. I've got no complaints. With 10 years, we built the company up, and then, as these things do, it wasn't so much the lesson, but when 2008 and the crash happened, a lot of businesses might have been prepared for something, but I don't think they're prepared for that. And it was a real tough time. It was a real tough decision to make, to decide to leave the business because of the numbers going down, of the success we'd had in the previous few years. But it did teach me a few things about the finance and running a business and the challenges of running a small business, about being on top of the numbers, being able to forecast ahead, getting your head around simple things like, well, I say simple things, what sounds simple but not, the difference between P&L and a cash flow, and lots of little things that small businesses have to think every minute of the day, every day of the week, every week of the month, never mind every month of the year. And it's a real challenge out there. There are millions of small businesses in this country that are the bedrock of our UK PLC. And there's a lot of good business out there trying to work hard and make an honest crust. And at times you wonder whether, and again, I'm not trying to get political, it's just across the spectrum over the 25 years I've been doing it. It's at times sometimes wonder whether, is it worth us doing all this? Because we just seem to be giving a lot of it away. So, it is a real challenge. It is a real challenge for anybody who runs a small business. I have the utmost respect for, because I know what we all go through when we're running a small business.
Cool. Perfect. Hey, there's 3 questions I always ask. Well, actually, there's 2 questions I always ask, but I've got.
I was going to say, you told me there were only 2. But yeah,
there are normally only 2. There's 3 for you because one of them is
rugby related. Yeah.
And it's the timing, of course, is important for that one. But we'll get to that in the end. But the first one is, if you had to pick one event. I know we've talked about all these highs and lows and all that sort of thing. Yeah. One event. What's the most memorable event of your life?
Well, that's obviously, I can't answer that one because there were 2 for obvious reasons. I've got 2 lovely daughters, very proud of them. And honestly, I was there at both their births. Wendy rang me up at lunchtime and said, "Oh, I'm having a bit of pains and stuff like that." I said, "What? Is it happening? Do you want me to come home?" She said, "I don't know. I've never had a baby before." And I said, "Well, do you want me to come home?" I said, No, it's fine. I'm still walking around. It's fine. You go and fly and then we'll chat when you get home. So I went flying. Of course, I was flying to Canberra at the time. This is 1990. I was flying to Canberra and I was off to do a 2.5-hour sortie or whatever. So I got airborne, I landed, and as I got off the crew bus into the squadron, the authorizer walked out with my hat, with my keys, and said, and the 700, the author sheet, and he said, "Sign here. Here's your keys and your hat. Go. Wendy's gone into hospital." So I was down at Whitton. As everybody knows, near Huntington. I had to drive up to Grantham because we lived up at Grantham at the time because Wendy used to be at Cottesmore, so we lived up there. And so I drove up through, and I had to drive up through Grantham High Street to go to the hospital, which is in the north of town, to burst in on a very good friend of ours, Kathy, who happened to be visiting Wendy at the time, helped her to go to hospital. And obviously the contractions were happening. The look of relief on Kathy's face when I appeared, running in with my flying suit, and literally definitely less than an hour, if not half an hour later, Rebecca arrived. And so I was there for the birth. And then for Alex's birth, 18 months later, a bit more time this time, and I was there. And actually, I was allowed to, as most of his dads are, especially the second one, was the same midwife. So I actually helped deliver the baby and cut the cord. So, those 2 are fantastic, 100%.
Yeah, that'd be pretty memorable.
Oh, yeah.
That's for sure. My second question, which is normally the conclusion, as you rightly point out, is what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
I'm struggling because I don't tend to find answering questions too difficult. I'm a relatively open person. I'm relatively modest, despite what we were talking about. I just love regaling stories. I love telling stories, but I like to think I'm relatively modest with it. And so whenever anybody asks me questions, I tend to offer my thoughts and my views, and I don't tend to hold back or struggle to answer it. So I suppose the only questions I suppose I would find difficult are those that potentially, if I feel they're slightly explosive, and I don't want to answer that question because it might prove to be incendiary. So we always walk that level of caution. I don't know whether that's an answer or not, but they'll have to do.
No, that's fine. I mean, you can. I think some people do find it easier to answer the question than others. So no, that's cool. And I can't not ask you the question. We're on as we record this, we're on the cusp of the Six Nations rugby starting for 2025. Yep. Who's going to win?
At the moment, I'd say France are the favourites to win. The slight pause is there that I know that we're playing. I'd like to think we're going to do okay. I'm not as despondent, so I'm a half full type of guy. And in the last year, if you take when Steve Borthwick took over, he literally had a few weeks to get into his squad before he played the Six Nations then. And we played very average for the first couple of games. That was felt as being a disappointment. Then we went to the Southern Hemisphere and toured, and we lost to New Zealand twice, but we were up with about 20 minutes to go, and we lost one of the games by a few points and the other game by a bit more than a few points. So they're really close, and we competed with one of the best teams in the world in their home ground, and we could have won at least one game, if not 2. And then we play in the autumn internationals, and again, against New Zealand, we were leading in the second half, and we should have closed the match out, and we didn't. So we had 3 games to New Zealand, but we we were competing with them. And although we didn't win the game, which for a lot of people is the important bit, but for me, I'm looking at it from a point of view over a year. How have we as a team developed? And are we looking like we're a team that can win some games? And it looked like we were a team to go win games. Actually, winning it is a different proposition altogether. Poor performance against Australia. They worked out our defensive system and found us out, and we were leading, and we let them score in the last minute of the game. Fair play to Australia. They took the chances of one. So that should have been a win. And then South Africa, again, we were leading and been competing for the first hour. But I would say it just felt as if South Africa just went up a couple of gears in the last 20 minutes and just ran away. But
yeah, I was at that game.
That to me, though, I just felt that the side, as the year went along, the 2024, I felt as a team, I could see an improvement. Yes, they weren't winning the games or whatever, but I personally could see that. And so the only way that I'll feel confident that what I'm talking about is, not bull, is if I start to see same improvement throughout this Six Nations. Do I think they're going to win the Grand Slam or win the championship? England? No, I don't think so. I think France are the favourites to win it, then probably Ireland. But until I see Ireland play against England on Saturday, I just have to reserve judgment on that, because Ireland they were average in the autumn internationals last year. But what I will say is, Wales are the ones that are really finding it tough at the moment. But I would say it's probably the closest between the teams of all six in the Six Nations. Italy now, they've got a decent fly half. They've got a decent team. They're no mugs.
They've really improved Italy, haven't they? From being it's just a certain win. It's no longer that.
They're for a while since when they first started, very raw and that sort of stuff, and they sort of had an Argentinian fly half, and it was quite good. But they went through a stage where some average fly halves, not bad, but just average. But now they've got this Kabisi. He's a very good fly half. He plays in the French top 14. He's a very good fly half. So now they've got a decent fly half. That team is starting to tick now. And really, my fear is for Wales. I'm fearful of the score against France. This time is going to be out, but obviously you can tell when this was being recorded tonight. And so by the time this comes out, it'll be whether I'm right or wrong, and I'll be judged on that. But, I can't see Wales winning that. And as some people I know who are Welsh are getting rather concerned and be talking to me about it could be messy. And if anybody watched Toulouse play Tigers a couple of weeks ago, and as depressing as it was for us to be thrashed 80 points to 12, and in the first half, by the time I got halfway through the first half, I was depressed about the fact that we're going to get stuffed here, and just disappointed about the way we played to a certain extent, but we did play some bits well. But I just eventually sat back, and for the last hour of that game, I just sat back and watched an outstanding Toulouse side play rugby. If anybody wants to see rugby played to perfection, that's the best rugby I've seen by a team played. It was incredible. To see what they could do.
Nice. I didn't see that match. No, I'll have to go to look.
Anybody, if you get a chance to watch even just extended highlights and watch Toulouse plays, it was outstanding. And of course, most of those Toulouse players are in the French side, plus some of the better ones from the other good French side. So so France is my tip for the if not the championship, the Grand Slam.
Fantastic, Rory. You've been incredibly generous with your time. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I'm very, very grateful to you. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Take care. I really hope you've enjoyed this fabulous interview with Rory Underwood. What a privilege to have someone of his incredible stature in terms of his rugby career, but also his Air Force career, and so many great insights in terms of all the leadership things he's done and is continuing to do. If you enjoyed it, please share it. Please share it widely with your friends and like it, subscribe to it, do all the things that you can normally do to help boost the podcast. That would be really appreciated. And if you really value this stuff, then as I've said on previous episodes, please go to patreon.com, www.patreon.com/leading4life, and become either a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show, because that will support the show financially, and that is incredibly valuable in terms of helping me to continue to keep this going. And I would enormously appreciate anything you can do in that regard. Either way, I'm grateful for you listening, and thank you very much indeed if you've persisted this long, and I hope to see you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye now.